Hey everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. Another day, another death race. The Oscars are quickly approaching, and I have been going through every single nominee this year in any category, across every category, and especially this category. I'm so excited to talk about these three categories, these 15 films, these short films. This is the short film video. I was gonna pair animated short with the animated features, and I was gonna pair documentary short with the documentary features, and I was like, no, I want to give these short films their own spotlight because every year they continue to surprise me. Some of the short films this year I didn't love as much as I have in past years, but I think this is just such a fun way to kind of introduce people to different types of cinema and new voices in cinema. Because for the most part, save for one very big outlier in this 15 film slate, these are kind of up and coming directors. These are people that you don't necessarily know off the cuff when you hear their names. And I think it's very exciting that this category in particular propels so many stars to then go and further their careers and build their careers. One of the directors of one of these shorts literally just released a movie at Sundance shortly after that got wide acclaim that won the jury prize at Sundance. So, or audience prize, I forget which one, but it's very interesting to see how some directors are already taking off because of these shorts and how this kind of snowball effect affects their career. So I wanted to give all 15 of these shorts their own spotlight. Of course, this is part of my Oscars Death Race video series, this 5-part series where I will be covering every single nominee nominated for the Oscars this year. I did the above the line categories. I did the music categories. Today we are doing the short film categories, and we will continue to go on as we inch closer to Oscar night, which is fastly approaching. Fastly approaching? Is that a word? Yes, I think so. But let's talk about these shorts. I'm going to start with the documentary shorts this year because this was kind of like my one kind of category across all the categories of the Oscars where I didn't have one film that I was like wowed by. You know, all of them were very okay, and I wish I had liked these a little bit more, but there is one that I think is a standout amongst the five. But let's talk about them, starting in alphabetical order with the ABCs of book banning. This is one that I think a lot of people are getting really excited about, really buzzed about, talking about, and I don't quite see the hype, and I think this is the reason why. I think the issue it's presenting is immensely important. And I think honestly, when looking at what the Oscar voters are voting for, they might be voting for what issues they think are most important to acknowledge. And for that reason, I think the ABCs of book banning actually stands a good chance of winning this category because the subject matter is so important. And having these kids talk about the books that they've read that they don't want banned, I mean, it's a very important issue. And I think it's presented in a very uninteresting way, which is the problem. I think, you know, this film almost feels like a slideshow that was made on PowerPoint in the fact that like it's just a picture of a book and it says banned, and then it goes on to an interview and then it's another picture of a book and banned. And you know, that can be fine, a matter of fact approach, but it just feels like something that doesn't have any sort of Oscar caliber flair to its presentation, where I think you could have. I think you could have explored a very more interesting medium to tell this tale and tell this story because the issue is so important. And another issue I have is that I feel like a lot of the times for documentaries that present these big issues, especially with the features, they find a way to try to go about resolving them and talk about how they can fix it. And I know the obvious answer here is to just not ban the books, but I would have loved to see this extra kind of chapter to see, instead of just talking about the books that are banned and the issue itself, talk about how they're going to try to fix it, how they're going to try to go forth in remedying this horrible thing that's been happening to these educational systems around the world where books are being banned. I would have loved to see a solution, and I honestly would have also loved to see another perspective talking about why they banned the books, because I think it's very one-sided, and of course I agree with that side. I agree with the kids. I think these books should not be banned, but I also think it would have been really fascinating to hear from the other voices, maybe some politicians in those states, and talk about why they are banning these books, so we can get this full thorough perspective, so we know exactly what the full story and the full picture is. It feels like it's taking a very small sample size, being these kids, which is a great sample size to have. I love how all this is from the kids' perspective, but I really would have loved to see, okay, the kids talking about why they want these books in their classrooms, some of the antagonistic figures telling us why they banned it, and then these kids kind of coming together and these other, you know, figures talking about how they can solve it. And again, that's just not what the movie is. So like, maybe there's another version of this movie that could exist. This is the version we got, and the version we got I think is a little stale because of it. But I do think the issue is so important so I'm willing to kind of forgive it a little bit. It's like one of those really middle of the road documentary shorts for me, where I don't hate it because I think the subject matter is so important, but I don't love it because I think it could have gone even further in trying to show a even broader picture in how they're going to solve a problem rather than just address it. Next, we're moving on to The Barber of Little Rock. This is a very similar short in the sense that I feel like the issue it presents is much more important and much more impactful than the actual film itself and the filmmaking and the presentation. It's very stale in terms of its presentation. It's well shot, it's well told, it's pretty simple. I mean, there aren't any big twists or any big shocks to this film, which I actually kind of appreciated. It's a little bit more kind of just matter of fact, but in a slightly more interesting way than ABC's A Book Banning in terms of its presentation. But as for what it is about, it explores this racial wealth gap in America as told through this like small community in Little Rock, Arkansas. You see this one figure trying to like kind of fight for this just economy, which I think is a really interesting premise. And I really do think of all the shorts in this category, I think this one probably serves itself best for a feature-length documentary, because I think this is something that could really aid in even further exploration of its themes. So I like this one. I think it's a little simple, because it's not trying to do too much with its presentation, but it is competently shot. It is a very inspiring story. It's a very inspiring figure. I just wish he was given maybe a more electrifying or more magnetic style of documentary, because he is such an important figure. Similarly to what I said about Rustin, the Coleman Domingo film a few videos ago, just I feel like the movie itself doesn't serve the subject as well as it should, but it is a very important subject. A lot of these subjects are very important, which is why I think they do get nominated, which is why I think some of them win, because I think a lot of the subjects is what is intriguing about these documentaries more so than the presentation. It's just for some reason my brain likes to focus a little bit more on the way things are told rather than what is told, and that's where that roadblock kind of stands. Speaking of something standing in between something, let's talk about Island in Between. That was a weird segue, but this kind of tells a story about this island that sits kind of in the middle of the coast of Taiwan and China, and it really just explores kind of the politics of Taiwan and China, but it's done so in an interesting perspective, where the actual filmmaker itself is someone who's kind of telling his life story through this kind of political climate. The problem is, I think it's just a little slowly paced, a little boring. I think even more so than the ABC's of Book Banning and The Barber of Little Rock, I think I was kind of waiting for this to be over. Not because it wasn't an interesting story, but more so because, again, the presentation of it wasn't as interesting. I think this is honestly more stunning in terms of its photography than anything else in the category, really, save for maybe the next film we're going to talk about. I think it's interesting, but ultimately it was the documentary short that I thought the least about after finishing them. And yes, I know I said some negative things about the ABC's of Book Banning and The Barber of Little Rock, but at least those films, I think because of their messages, kind of stuck a little bit more to me. Whereas the next film we're going to be talking about is my favorite of the category, which is The Last Repair Shop. This one, I think, is the one that spoke to me the most just personally. This is about a repair shop that repairs instruments, and you kind of see these kids' perspectives as these, child musicians, them kind of wanting to strive for bigger and better things. And then you get the perspectives of the people in the shop and why they do what they do and why they continue their craft, even though it is a dying kind of occupation, repairing instruments. It's a very niche thing, but it's a very integral thing, and you kind of see why it's important. And then they go further, and that's kind of the thing I was upset about with Book Banning, is like this film I feel like goes even deeper and gets more perspective overall. And the whole time I was waiting to see them actually play these instruments, and they don't for a long time, but when they do, it all kind of accumulates into this gorgeous performance, instrumental performance. I was like, wow, that was a great payoff. Like, I feel like it has a great payoff for the buildup it's getting at. Like, is it the best documentary short I've ever seen? No. I mean, it does drag at times because some of these, interviews are elongated. This is the longest short, I believe, of the category. So some of the, moments feel like a little stretched out, but I think the cinematography is gorgeous. The way they shoot these people repairing instruments, it's kind of like that scene from Toy Story 2 where the guy's like cleaning Woody, the doll Woody, and like everything is so polished and perfect. You kind of get that with this short too, like where they're tightening the strings of the violins and threading the bows and whatever it is. I think it's very interesting to see the cinematography here, because it really does give it this kind of warm, kind of rustic feel, and then it accumulates in just this gorgeous orchestration orchestral performance that is so impactful. And being a musician, being someone who's in the theater world and who loves immersing myself with orchestrational music, is that a word? I'm saying made up words today. But I really do think this one stuck the closest to me because it's an issue that I'm most passionate about, and it is a presentation that awed me. And lastly, we have 99 YPO. This is a very sweet film. This is by the same director, Sean Wang. Sean Wang, who just had a film DD at Sundance. That's the one I was alluding to earlier. So his career has already taken off. It's already a really solid year for Sean Wang. But 99 YPO tells the story of his two grandmothers. And I think it's very sweet. It's very wholesome. It's very slice of life. It's just kind of observing their everyday and kind of the, you know, idea of not letting age define you and restrict your opportunities and just living your life to the fullest. It's very sweet. It has the least message to say of any of these films, which I actually kind of found a bit refreshing because it's just kind of a very nice documentation of time and life, kind of how like that How Do You Measure a Year documentary was last year, which was my favorite of these shorts last year. 99 YPO, though, it's a little too simple at times where I was kind of like waiting for something a little bit more meatier to come. But then at the same time, I was like reflecting on all these shorts and I was like, you know what? The sweet one about the grandmothers might just be one of the better ones simply because it was just sweet, wholesome, got its point across very clearly, was very well shot, very well directed, and clearly had some real passion and heart behind it that I feel like some shorts sometimes lack. So I really like this one. I did. I didn't love it the first time I watched it, but the more I thought about it, I liked it more. So those are the documentary shorts. I might as well rank them while I'm here. I know I usually save the rankings for the end, but I might as well rank them while I'm here. At 5, I do have Island in Between just because I don't necessarily think it stuck with me as much as the other 4. At number 4, I do have the ABCs of book banning. I just think the presentation is frustrating given how important the subject matter is. At number 3, I do have The Barber of Little Rock, which I think is in a similar boat where I wish the presentation was a little stronger, but it is at least solid and competent and very important in terms of its subject matter. At number 2, I do have 99 YPO. I think it's very sweet. And then at number 1, I do have The Last Repair Shop because it is the one that kind of did wow me more than the others, even though I think this category in general is a little bit weak. So next, moving on to a category that I actually think was very, very strong, which is Best Animated Short. And these shorts I was very impressed by, mostly for the animation styles. I think all 5 of these are so different in the way they are stylized that makes it really fun to talk about. Now, there is one film that I know a lot of people out there have been giving a lot of hate, but I'll talk about it in a sec. But I'm going to start with Letter to a Pig, which was kind of at first the favorite to win here. I think it tells a very important story. It's a Holocaust story. We need those stories now, even more than ever, and I really do think the animation style is very interesting. I did get a little bored by it as it went on. Not necessarily bored, but more so kind of checking out because I was kind of struggling to keep up with it. And I like to pride myself. I'm a little on a little bit of a soapbox that like I feel like I can pick up a lot of the times on these more like kind of nuanced and more complicated premises of things, but this one really kind of took me for a loop, and I think that's a good thing though. I think it's one of those films where I am thinking about it at least, and I'm kind of mulling it over in my mind, which I think any great film does. The problem is though, I think because it is a little confounding in the final like half of the film, because the first half of the film is very kind of straightforward, this story about a Holocaust survivor telling his story, and then the second half kind of gets more into like the dream sequences and stuff. I think that second half kind of it led me astray at times where I want to kind of rewatch this to kind of get a broader picture and try to figure out what exactly the theme is. And I think that's the problem. It's not the fact that it's confusing and confounding, but more so that I think the message is lost a little bit. And I think that's something that a lot of people have been sharing with this film, is that it looks really cool. The animation style is really interesting. Personally, I thought it got a little much at times because the kind of pencil sketches, they kind of like do this little shaky thing. It's hard to visualize without actually showing you, but you know what I mean if you've seen it. Like there's almost like a shakiness to the visuals that I watched this on a laptop, which was pretty close to my face, so maybe it gave me the improper viewing experience, the not ideal viewing experience. But I do think this short is interesting, and I think that's one thing that these short films in general, even the bad ones, or even the ones I don't love as much, they at least give you something to think about and something to like mull over in your mind. So I am very grateful for that, even though this film didn't necessarily resonate with me as much because I'm still struggling to find out what exactly he was trying to say at times. But I did think it was at least very well done for what it was. Next, 95 senses, and this one was a real surprise for me because as it went along, it was this guy kind of talking about each of his senses, and he's like going through the things he hears and the things he says and the things he smells and all these things. And the animation's great. It's narrated by Tim Blake Nelson. I didn't necessarily know where it was going, but once it kind of shows its, it kind of opens the curtain and you kind of see what's standing behind it and kind of see where this character is and the circumstance of his life. I think the film is 90% more fascinating because now you get this other perspective of, oh, this is why these sensual, no, sensual has a weird connotation. Sensory experiences, why they are so meaningful in this moment for this character and why the stakes are so high. And I think that's something that a lot of the short films do really well, is giving you that one kind of click toward the, 2/3 mark of the film, to where it kind of recontextualizes everything and kind of makes you go, whoa, okay, this is what it's happening. Because I think for a feature length film, it's hard to build everything to one twist, because if the twist doesn't pay off, you wasted time and it doesn't necessarily feel satisfactory. Whereas here with the short film, you only have such a small amount of time, so a twist actually can really act to your benefit. And I think in this case it does. It's not a huge twist. I think honestly, if you look up the premise of this film, it might even give away what that twist is, but I won't say it because I didn't know it and I was surprised, and it kind of really took me through a very interesting emotional journey because we were kind of seeing this character reflect on his life and his mistakes while also using the senses to kind of guide him through it. I thought it was really interesting, and I think the way it was animated to kind of show each of these senses and give it a different color and a different flavor, I thought it was really interesting. So I really like this one. Another one that I thought was just so cool in terms of its animation was Our Uniform. Now, this is a very short film. It's already a short film, but this is like a short film. This is like 6 minutes long. But it does kind of tell the story, or more so kind of reflect the experiences of women wearing hijabs, and kind of the pressures that society maybe puts on them. And they make it very clear from the top that they're not criticizing hijabs or criticizing religious kind of distinctions like that, but they are kind of just telling their own true experience in how kind of other people tend to sometimes dictate the way they go about their lives, and how even when you're proud of your culture, there are still things that don't allow you to be completely free and completely express yourself the way you would like to. But it also just is so fascinating to look at it animation wise. I mean, it is one of these films that is kind of more tactile. Like, it doesn't feel drawn, because everything was kind of animated on this denim. So there's real tactile feeling to it. Every single thread, there's a lot of like sewing, and there's a lot of different denim prints, and it's really interesting. Like, they used clothes to animate the film. It's almost like stop motion, how you use clay, but here they're using clothes. So I think for animation, this is probably the coolest animated film in terms of we're looking at strictly the animation. It is a very short film, so it's hard to gauge, especially compared to some of the other ones, how it would rank necessarily for me. But I think in terms of just the animation itself, it's really, really cool. Next, we're moving on to Pachyderm, which was by far my favorite of these shorts. And I know I'm spoiling my ranking right now, but I really do think Pachyderm just hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, this is a film that is very clearly meant to tell a story that is harrowing, that has a lot of pain underneath it, that is kind of rising up some really tough demons for the lead character. And I don't know how autobiographical it is or if it is merely fictionalized, but the way it's kind of constructed, you don't necessarily know what it's building to. And it's not one of those things where there's a huge twist. It's more so the film going along and adding little hints and clues as it's building, to where at the end you can look back and you're like, oh, that's what it was trying to say. Not necessarily a twist, but more so kind of just slowly building and unfolding as it goes, as it's blooming. And I think it's one of those shorts that, again, I don't want to necessarily say what it's about, because I think it's really important for the viewer to kind of have that emotional journey for themselves. But once everything kind of comes into place and clicks into place, and the full picture is realized, it's one of those shorts that'll just break your heart, but then also kind of like wow you, because you're like, wow, the power of storytelling, the power of movies. So this was one of those like the power of movies. And I think if honestly we had combined animated short and animated feature, this is probably my favorite animated anything of the year, even more so than the animated features that I love this year, like Spider-Verse, Boy in the Heron, Robot Dreams. Like, I think this is the best piece of animation I have seen in 2023. So take with that what you will. And moving on to the last short, which has somehow become the villain of awards season, which is War is Over, based on the song by John and Yoko, which of course you know the song. So this is Christmas, and the war is over if you want it. And of course, this obviously builds to that needle drop. And I've seen the complaints. It is very cheesy. It is kind of the stand-in for that Disney Pixar short that we get every year. And the fact that it's so sappy and so sentimental. There's a cute little pigeon, a cute little carrier pigeon. The story basically tells a story of this cute little carrier pigeon who delivers these little notes back and forth between enemies on enemy lines during World War One. And each little piece of paper has like a chess move. So they're basically playing a remote game of chess through this carrier pigeon, which is a really cute premise. And then it kind of builds to this overall message of like, well, you're divided, but you can stand united, and war is over if you want it. And it's a very general, kind of, notion. War is over if you want it. It's very simple. But I think, they really hammer home the message by, really going for it. They go for a real tear-jerking moment, and then all the characters kind of have this one moment of realization, and then the song kicks in. It's so cheesy. It's so over the top. It's so corny. But I really kind of liked it. I mean, it's one of those shorts where I can totally see why people are like absolutely hating it, because it is very, very, very sappy and very, very eye-rollingly obnoxious in how it's trying to tell its message. But at the same time, I was kind of charmed by it. I don't know. Maybe it's a cute pigeon. Maybe it's the fact that I don't know. Maybe the animation style, the Thomas Newman score. I really don't know. I like this one, and I know so many people don't. And I'm not trying to say it's the best film or it should win. It probably will win because it's most audience accessible. Maybe it's just kind of that one film where I went in with low expectations, so I was expecting a lot worse. And when I saw it, I was like, okay. But I enjoyed it. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I will go no further than that. It is an obnoxious needle drop, but hey, I also like the song. So I think your mileage may vary on how many times you heard that play on the Christmas radio as a kid, driving around hearing it. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. Let's talk about these animated shorts, though, as a whole and what I would rank them. Number 5, I'm going to put Letter to a Pig, just because this is the kind of one short that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Not to say it's the worst, but just the one that I least responded to, because I need another viewing to soak it all in. At number 4, Our Uniform. I thought the animation style was absolutely stunning, even though the story itself was very quaint and simple. At number 3, though, is War's Over. I know that's a little polarizing for some. It's not the best short, but it's not the worst. It's smack dab in the middle for me. Number 2, 95 Senses. I thought this was very fascinating, very engaging. And then number 1, Pachyderm, my favorite animated film of the year, short or otherwise. But next, let's move on to the live action shorts, which I will tell you right now, each one of these films has a trigger warning of some sort. So I'm just going to list off the trigger warnings. So if you want to tune out, please do, because these are a pretty hefty bunch of films here. There's themes of murder, suicide, abortion, funerals/wakes/open caskets, and of course, mainstream directors in short film categories, which I know is also triggering for some people. I've heard the complaints. I've heard it, and we'll talk about it. But I just wanted to give those blanket trigger warnings, just because there are a lot of heavy things in these shorts, starting with The After, which is also probably, I don't want to say the heaviest, because all these shorts are very heavy, but this one is heavy to the point where I don't think it needed to be heavy, because it's telling the story about this father going through grief, losing his wife and daughter very early on in the film. You see it happen very early on in the film, and I think that's the biggest detriment to this film, and why I am honestly surprised this is nominated, because they do this really, really cruel and crazy murder sequence early on in the film where you see the wife and daughter murdered, which I just thought was so unnecessary. And I know maybe in an elongated like 2-hour film it would have made more sense, but when you only have this short amount of time, I think it's very clear from early on in the film that he is grieving. I don't think you necessarily need to show the trauma. Maybe it was trying to get an emotional rise out of people, but this was one of those shorts where I felt it was just so emotionally manipulative in the way it was trying to really make us sad and make us, feel this despair and this tragedy. And I think it would have been much more powerful had we just opened with David Oyelowo in the present as this kind of cab driver. I think he's an Uber driver or cab driver, kind of just wondering what's happened in his life, and as the film goes on, maybe kind of explore it and him kind of talking about it rather than just smacking us across the face really early on with this horrific act of violence and tragedy. And I get it. Like when you're in a short amount of time, you want to really kind of grasp the audience's attention, but at the same time, I just felt it was a little unnecessary. And I think the film itself kind of continues to hit that hammer really heavy as it goes along. It doesn't really let up. And it's just this kind of 20 minutes of misery and despair. And I don't know. I really didn't like this one, even though I think David Oyelowo is great in the lead character. I just felt the choice of actually showing us this really horrific act early on really set the tone for a very uncomfortable watch. And it didn't get easier from there. And I get it. It doesn't get easier. Death is tough. And I get that. But there's another film, which we'll talk about very soon, that handles death in such a more nuanced way and a more appropriate way and a more impactful way because it doesn't go far to kind of show this kind of spectacular, spectacle like murder scene. I don't know. I didn't like The After very much at all. It was my least favorite of all 15 of these shorts, if I'll be honest. But the next one is Invincible. And this is one that, again, deals with heavy subject matter, deals with suicide. And it deals with I believe it's a true story of a boy who killed himself, which is very sad. And you kind of chronicle his last few days. And it's not done in an emotionally manipulative way, which I found very refreshing because I think a film like this could have been very kind of like The After, very heavy-handed and shown us kind of just this really dark and like very emotionally strenuous journey. And it is a very emotionally strenuous journey, but it's done in a very simplistic, slow way. Like the build is very slow and it never once feels emotionally manipulative. It feels like it's just this honest kind of slice of life that eventually accumulates in something very dark and very tragic. But ultimately, as it's going along, it just feels like it's trying to just tell this story and be honest rather than get any sort of reaction out of an audience, which I found very, very meaningful. As someone who's dealt with my own mental health issues, it was very refreshing to see a film that didn't try to, make mental health this kind of spectacle or this thing worth milking this really sappy drama out of. It was just very authentic and very slice of life, and I very much appreciated it. It's going to be a little slow for some, but I was really, engaged by it because I did kind of understand where the film was going because they kind of open on the ending. It's kind of one of those films where they start with the ending and then go through it and then end with that same ending. And I know some people have complained about the fact that like I wish we didn't know how it ended, but I think it's important, especially for subject matter like this, to know what we're getting ourselves into early on. Makes the journey a little bit easier because at least we can prepare for it, and it's not as sudden, it's not as jarring as like The After, where it just kind of comes out of nowhere and it's like dun 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 dun, dun, like Psycho. Um, so yeah, I really liked Invincible, and I really loved what it had to say about mental health and mental illness in a very sad way, but in a way that I felt was very respectful to the subject matter. And now moving on to Night of Fortune, which is another one that I thought was very, very respectful for the subject matter of grief. And this is a comedy about grief, and I think it's very hard to toe that line between comedy and grief. But it centers around this man who goes in to see his wife's body after her death. She's in the morgue or and in the casket, and he's going to visit her, and he doesn't have the strength to open the casket, and he comes across this one guy who basically is also there mourning his wife, and you just start to see how this relationship kind of leads both of these men to kind of come to terms with their grief and come to a very interesting understanding of grief and processing of grief. And yes, there's humor, but it's very dark humor, but it's humor in a way that I feel like feels natural for a circumstance like this because life is awkward and life is uncomfortable, and there's sometimes some comedy in some life scenarios. And I think it does a good job delivering some good dark comedy without making it offensive to people who go through grief and who go through these traumatic processes of having to go through funeral arrangements and wakes and all that stuff. So I thought, again, like Invincible, this handled a very difficult subject matter with a lot of grace, and I think that's so important. And another kind of juxtaposition with The After, I keep coming back to it, but it's like we don't see the excessive hardship. Instead, we kind of just focus on the real life kind of happenings that kind of lead to more authentic presentation, which I really appreciated for Night of Fortune. Moving on now to Red, White, and Blue, another film that deals with something very, very important, very topical, and very difficult to portray on screen, which is abortion. And it's about this woman played by Brittany Snow, who was very nice to see in this role. Brittany Snow is trying to raise money to get an abortion and to cross the border because she can't get an abortion in her state, I believe, or it's very costly to. And so you start to see how she tries to build up the money to get it, and then her and her daughter go on a road trip to get an abortion. There is a twist to this one. There is a twist that I did see coming as soon as like the halfway point. Once they started the journey to get the abortion, I went, wait a sec. And then when I was proven right, it's one of those things where I guessed the twist, but it doesn't make the twist any less impactful because when it is revealed, I went, wow. I was really stunned by it because I think this is another one that people have been saying is emotionally manipulative, but I think this one is kind of sadly true to real life where you will have these kind of jarring moments of realization of certain aspects of certain issues where you're like, whoa, oh, I haven't even considered that or thought about that. And I think for abortion specifically, I think this film is going to be big for people who are very anti-abortion or at least anti-choice. I think this is going to be important for people to see, to realize that abortion is a very big topic and it covers a lot more ground than some people just think it does. You know, I think some people are very narrow minded and don't look at every single possibility of what or who the circumstances may pertain to. So I think this is a very important short. And yes, maybe it's a tad emotionally manipulative, but I didn't necessarily pick up on that. I was very engaged by it and I thought it was very impactful and got its message across. And it's a message I am very passionate about, pro-choice and, you know, abortion rights. And I think this is one of those films that I think if any film is to spoil the front runner, I think it's this one because I think this is the one that I think is going to surprise most audiences because of its twist, but also because of its very impactful subject matter and storytelling. And lastly, we have The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, which is, of course, the Roald Dahl short made by Wes Anderson. This is the most mainstream short, so I don't need to necessarily tell you the ins and outs of what it's about. Most people have seen this short, but it's a very whimsical adaptation of this Roald Dahl novel. And the thing that I'm most impressed by is the production design and the amount of detail and intricate artistry at play. I mean, Wes Anderson's one of our great artists, but he continues to surprise me in more and more ways with his career. And this year, especially with Asteroid City and these Roald Dahl shorts, he's really shown just how far he can stretch himself in terms of storytelling and in terms of vibes and humor and drama and also spectacle because his films look amazing. Now, I've heard the complaint of, is it fair to have a big mainstream director competing against kind of these up and comers? It's not unfair because it is a short film, so it should be able to qualify for the short film category. But is it in the spirit of the category? And I myself have thought about it. I'm like, is it in the spirit of the category to have Wes competing with them? But then I think Wes doesn't have an Oscar. And you know what? If this gets him his Oscar, I'll be happy because I love Wes Anderson. This particular short itself, I wasn't actually that high on aside from its spectacle. I thought the actual way it was told, the narration kind of got a little stale after a while. The fact that all these narrators kind of come to the camera and like tell these, you know, they narrate this story with a very monotonish voice. It got a little old after a while, but I think the acting is really strong. I think it's so cool to look at to where like I still would enjoy watching this again. I would seek this out again. It was much better than The After, I'll tell you that. Even though it didn't necessarily strike an emotional chord like the other three shorts did for me. But I do think, you know, I do understand the argument that maybe Wes shouldn't win because this category is all about boosting up new voices, but at the same time, it's a short film, so why shouldn't it compete in the short film category? So I do see both sides of the coin. Am I personally rooting for it because it's Wes? Yes. Am I rooting for it because it's my favorite of the shorts? No, because it's not my favorite of the shorts. And now to get into the ranking, at number 5, I have The After, which is obvious. At number 4, I actually do have The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. Not because I think it's bad. I think it's great. It's well done. But the other 3, I think, just hit me on a more emotional level. At number 3, I do have Red, White, and Blue. Again, a very emotional level. It hit me. And number 2, Night of Fortune. And number 1, Invincible. I think these are just 3 very strong, very emotional, very engaging shorts. And then Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar is just a very good display of filmmaking. I think any of those 4 winners would be very deserving and very exciting to see win. But I think Wes, if I had to rank them by who I most want to see win, I do want to see Wes Anderson get an Oscar. So I would put him at number 1 in terms of who I want to win, even though if I rank those films, Henry Sugar would land a little lower. But there we go. Let's look at all 15 of these now. Let's put them in green. There we go. They are crossed off the list. 15 films. That filled in a lot of our death race there. So we've still got plenty more films to go from the animated, documentary, international, and tech categories. So stay tuned. There are 2 more big videos coming for you. There's going to be a video coming out for the tech the films in the tech awards, all the design awards, visual effects, production design, costumes, all that. There's going to be a video for the animated documentary and international features, which I wanted to do separately from the shorts because I like to give the shorts their own spotlight here. And I hope you enjoyed. So thank you so much. What were your favorite shorts? Let me know down below. Did I inspire you to check out any of these shorts? Did I inspire you to stay away from any of these shorts? Let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to continue watching my death race coverage. And stay tuned because Sunday morning, I'm giving you my Oscar predictions as to who I think will win these categories. It's going to be tough for some of these, especially documentary short and live action short. There might be more of a 50-50 shot than most people are anticipating, even though I think animated short might be locked up. We'll see. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.